In this tutorial, or this series of tutorials, we're going to talk about curtain walls. Now, curtain walls in Revit specifically refer to transparent window walls with some sort of mullion grid. They're a particular type of wall family, and they have a few rules that govern them. So what I'm going to try and do here is outline all of those rules, show you a couple different curtain wall systems. You might be familiar with this tool already, but there's a logic behind this. So I'm going to try and spell out that logic here. Now, before we do this in the model itself, I'm just going to go to a default project here, and I'm going to show you a couple different curtain walls. Now, if we go to architecture wall architectural, if you drop down on the properties, you can see this curtain wall system family here. You have a couple options. I'm going to explain the curtain wall 1 and the storefront and show the difference behind them and see how you can manipulate some of the parameters so that you can get something to your aesthetic liking. So let's draw a curtain wall 1 in here, and let's see what this looks like in a 3D view. So what we have are these system panels that are divided on what's called a grid, a system grid. There are some very small mullions here, but they're only in the vertical channel. And when I select this, I can select this all as one wall. This is just like a regular wall, but when I hover over it, you can see it's a curtain wall 1. This is really like a system that collects some rules. Now the rules, you can see on the properties panel. So some new properties here that aren't in a normal wall are this vertical grid and this horizontal grid. Now I can change these. You can see that it will add a number. I can go pretty high here to 20, and these get pretty divided. But this doesn't really let me control the exact distance between them. This is a totally fine method of creating a curtain wall, though. But let's say we did want to control the spacing between them. You have to edit the type, and keep in mind that if you edit this type, it will edit all of the families, all of the walls that are of this family. So you can't just have curtain wall 1 with one spacing pattern and curtain wall 1 with another spacing pattern. You have to duplicate it and recreate it. So let's change the layout rule here to something like a maximum spacing. Now if we hit apply and we go back, you can see that I can't change this. This is a grayed out parameter, so I have to go and I have to change the maximum spacing rule. So this just does a calculation, and it tries to find the maximum spacing to be 5 feet. I can change this to like 12 feet. And there you can see I have something similar to the original curtain wall. Now, a good rule of thumb for this class is about 50 to 60 square feet for these window panes. When you're selecting a curtain wall, you can always tab over to select the individual elements of the curtain wall. These are basically composite systems. And here you can see that this is a 5 by 12 max, so that would be a 60-foot max. 60 square foot max, but you can see because of the max spacing, just like our maximum spacing for the beams, it adjusts to something slightly smaller because the chance of me, drawing this wall in randomly at a dimension that would perfectly get this to be 60 square feet is pretty low. So it's 55 square feet. So you could always check to see if you're in sort of an economical realm here. And the height is 5 feet, but the width is 11. Just over 11 feet, so there it has adjusted from 12. So what else can we select when we hover over? Well, we can select these grid lines. So let's hover over here. You can select this grid line. You can see it's a curtain wall grid. If I unpin it, I can't delete it because it's part of the system rules. But I can delete these mullions, or I can select the mullions as well. But you have to unpin them, so just keep in mind. And when you start to edit, individual mullions, it gets a little bit hairy. You can get lost here pretty easily, and when you readjust this thing, like if I edit the type and I change this to, let's say, the vertical grid is spaced 5 here. You can see that that one moves over and it gets redrawn here. Now how would I redraw this? Well, I can go to Architecture, and under the Build tab, there's actually a mullion tab. So I can create mullions on these grids. Now mullions are families themselves, so here you can see I would have to go to the 1-inch square and add it to the grid. So that is another way to create mullions. If you don't want to create it in the family, which is apparent here, so if we edit the type, you can see there's a vertical and a horizontal mullion, and I can change these. There's no horizontal mullions right now, but let's change it to 1 inch. You could do that, but if you wanted a very particular type on a very particular sort of line for some reason, you can always change it. So what else? Let's go ahead and create another type of curtain wall to see the difference between the two. So here I'm creating the storefront. Let's go to a 3D view, and you can see that this is based on different rules with a different mullion type that populates it. So you could choose either one of these as a good starting point. You can edit this type, and you can see that there's a few things that are different. This is based on maximum spacing already, and it's got rectangular 2.5 by 5 inch mullions. These are larger mullion types that are closer to what you would see on sort of a storefront, right? Which is why the type is called storefront. The justification is also a thing that you can change. So this is a 20-foot wall, which means that there's an 8-foot panel here, an 8-foot panel here, and then it caps out at a 4-foot panel here. Now we could change it to start at the top and go to the bottom by changing the horizontal grid justification. So let's change this to the end, and you can see that it starts here and goes downwards. You have to be a little bit careful with this because you're going to have doors in here, so that might disrupt the rhythm. We're not really focusing on doors. But just keep in mind, there's a logic to why the storefront begins at the bottom and ends at the top. So you can put an 8-foot door in here, two doors in here based on a 5-foot grid. So let me draw another wall, and as a last part of this tutorial, just show you how you can manipulate this thing to exactly how you want it to be. So here you can see this time I placed it and I had already edited this system, so this one populates in the exact same manner as this one. So I can edit and I can duplicate this, and I can just call this facade or something else, and I could just manipulate this to be to my liking. I can start by none. I could delete all of the grid lines, and I can actually build this from scratch. So if you have somewhat of an irregular facade, you can add a curtain grid in under Architecture, Curtain Grid, and if you hover over the top of it, it will sort of allow you to place this line, and if you hover over the side of it, it will allow you to place another line. And based on the system, it will auto-populate with the mullion of the system. And you can move these around, but you have to move the grid. So you have to tab over here. Let's see if I can get it. Let's filter this out. Curtain wall grid. So here you can see that I can select that grid and I can actually move it up or down. I can give it a certain dimension. So if you want to be really picky about how that works, you can do this all manually. You can draw in your grid quite literally. If we take a look at the building that I have, this may look like a 10-foot by 10-foot exact grid, but it's not. It starts a little bit off by about 1 foot, and then it goes probably 12 by 10. So I would probably have to draw this in on my own. And that's just a decision that I would have to make, whether I want it to be perfect if I had a lot of time, or if I didn't have a lot of time. So let's just wrap up this tutorial by talking about how you would change these mullions to become something like louvers. I'm not going to show you exactly how to modify this type, but keep in mind that this mullion can actually be modified Now if it's part of a system, you might have to unpin it before you can change it. But if I've placed one in, like I just did, and it's unpinned, I can go ahead and change this to anything that I want. And I have some more parameters that I can get to here. So here's where I can add some sort of offset. So I'll add like 2 feet or something like that, and then it will adjust it. But you can see that because that was part of this element, like this is the same mullion family, it's going to adjust for all of them. So just keep that in mind. Like you have to organize your families. Yeah, we'll get into the mullions in the next tutorial when we talk about louvers. But those sort of go over all of the properties you need for your curtain wall. The ones that I didn't talk about are pretty similar to your regular walls, right? It's just your top constraint, your bottom constraint, and whether you want it to have a height that's based on an unconnected height. You can also pull these things up, make them larger, and they'll sort of adjust. They'll auto draw the grids based on the rules that you can modify in the family type. The last thing you have to keep in mind is that there are certain levels of control that you can have with this. You can draw all of this on your own by deleting the sort of grids, making a new curtain wall type, giving it no layout, and then populating the grids on your own. Now that's going to take more time, so if you have more time to deal with it, then that might be a good way to go. Or if you have a very regular building, you don't really need to do that. You can just make it based on the particular types, and you can always modify these systems as well. So you can choose individual grids within the system. So if you have just one pane that's slightly larger, you can always tab over to get to that grid line, and then you can change its dimensions. So there's a whole series of control that you can have here, and again, it just is based on the amount of time that you want to spend on this. If you just put in a storefront, you got some mullions, then we'd be good to go. You could just put that in and modify it based on its height and its location, like a normal wall. So the next tutorial I'll go over embedded curtain walls, and then we'll get into some windows.